Rich parents neglected their nerdy son throughout his childhood, depriving him of basic needs. Now, with a thriving tech business, they're crying foul and begging for his forgiveness. Hey everyone, I'm using a throwaway account to share my story, so I don't clutter my main one. I'm a 27-year-old man who started a successful business with a couple of college friends a year ago, and we're currently doing quite well financially. Recently, my estranged parents, both 54, reached out for the first time since my graduation, asking to become partners and invest in my business. I firmly said no. I didn't discuss it with my friends, as everyone was well aware of my tumultuous relationship with my parents, and I wanted to keep them out of my business dealings. Growing up, my parents neglected me and mocked me for being nerdy. It was odd, considering I was the kind of child most parents would be proud of. They were well off. My dad is a dental surgeon, and my mom is a CFO, yet they barely contributed to my basic needs, seemingly out of spite. I couldn't understand why they resented me until I spoke to my aunt, my dad's younger sister. She revealed that they blamed me for not achieving the success they had hoped for, believing that if they hadn't had to raise me, they would be in a better place in their careers. They only had me due to family pressure and never wanted a child, which led them to deal with me through bullying and neglect. Even though I had a roof over my head, I often lacked emotional support. I never received help with homework or even basic life challenges. Any request I made for non-essential items was met with dismissal or ridicule. They mocked my appearance and interests, predicting that I would amount to nothing more than a lowly IT worker, reinforcing their belief that investing in me was a waste. I experienced profound emotional neglect and grew up internalizing their insults, convinced there was something inherently wrong with me. I normalized their toxic behavior, which was damaging, but I didn't see it that way at the time. During my teenage years, I attempted to rebel, but my father quickly shut me down with threats of abandonment. I found solace in talking to my aunt, who often offered to intervene, but I feared the repercussions and didn't want to be a burden to anyone, so I endured my parents' mistreatment. After learning the root of their behavior, I resolved to cut them out of my life once I graduated from college. They had sent me to public school, which felt like a blatant disregard for my potential, a clear indication they didn't care about my education or well-being. I held on to some hope that they would change, but it was shattered when they informed me that after high school, I would have no place in their home unless I succeeded on my own. They also refused to pay for my college tuition, which finally pushed me over the edge. I knew I had a bright future ahead, and they were jeopardizing it by abandoning me. Despite my straight-A record, they told me I had no real future to jeopardize, dismissing my achievements as unrealistic. Their ignorance was astounding, and I realized they would never understand the value of my hard work and ambitions. Desperate for a chance at a better life, I ran away to my aunt's house weeks before my 18th birthday. With her support, I applied for colleges offering scholarships and ended up at a school with an 80% tuition waiver, enrolling in a reputable computer science program. My aunt, despite her middle-class income, agreed to cover the remaining costs. I chose to live in my dorm to minimize any necessary contact with my parents, who were still trying to convince my aunt to persuade me back home. Once I was away from their toxic environment, my life drastically improved. I felt happier, made friends easily, and eventually partnered with those friends to start my own IT firm, which has been thriving. I initially thought my parents wouldn't care about my accomplishments, but they showed up uninvited at my graduation, only to find they couldn't enter because I hadn't bought them tickets. After the ceremony, we met outside, and I was shocked to see them standing there with my visibly annoyed aunt. Instead of celebrating, I spent the next 2 hours arguing with them in their hotel room. They were furious about not being invited to my graduation, which felt laughable given their treatment of me. They had abandoned me when I needed them most, yet now they wanted to act like concerned parents. Their mistreatment had lasting emotional effects on me, and I was determined not to let them back into my life. I didn't feel they deserved an explanation, but I wanted to avoid a scene outside my college campus, so I reluctantly went with them to their hotel before I lost my temper. Once inside, I told them I never wanted to see them again. If they tried to contact me, I would get a protective order against them. After that, I walked out to meet my friends. I wasn't about to let them ruin a day that should have been filled with joy. From that point on, I didn't speak to them. My aunt later informed me that they were upset and angry but had left, discussing the possibility of disinheriting me. Not that it mattered, I had never expected anything from them. That was nearly 7 years ago. and we hadn't spoken since. Then, a couple of days ago, I received an unexpected call from them. They had asked my aunt for my phone number, claiming they wanted to apologize. My aunt had intended to warn me about this but forgot, understandable, considering how busy she is. But when I spoke with my parents, there was no apology. Instead, they immediately launched into a business proposal, wanting to invest in my company now that it was successful. Naturally, I declined, hung up, and blocked their number. I mentioned this to my friends, who fully supported my decision, given my tumultuous history with my parents. I didn't know what to expect next, but the very next day, they retaliated by tagging me and my friends in a vitriolic Facebook post. They claimed I wasn't the self-made tech entrepreneur I portrayed myself to be but rather a guy living off daddy's money who had only managed to create a moderately successful business because of their help. I was stunned by their audacity. For a moment, I considered calling them to set them straight. Instead, I decided to share something I had kept private for years. I had saved some old videos from my teenage years documenting my life with them. I had done this to prepare for any potential legal issues, as I had always known how toxic they were. I never shared the footage before because I wanted nothing to do with them and feared the fallout. But their Facebook post was the last straw. I posted those videos online, accompanied by a detailed caption explaining my upbringing and my parents' mistreatment. I used my public Instagram account and made sure to highlight my history with them. After posting, I contacted my lawyer and brought her up to speed. She was already ahead of me. She had begun filing a defamation lawsuit against my parents for their claims and planned to reach out to my business partners to discuss the implications since their names were also mentioned in the post. I screenshot the comments from relatives and friends of my parents, which supported my case. Once I had everything in order, I waited for my parents to call, anticipating they would beg for forgiveness. Instead, they reached out from my aunt's phone days later, but instead of an apology, they demanded one from me. Claiming I had messed up by posting those videos. They argued that while their rants on Facebook were only visible to a small audience, my public post reached far more people. They wanted me to take it down immediately, saying they were receiving hate messages and threats, which could jeopardize their careers. I felt a surge of defiance and told them they deserved every bit of it before hanging up. I archived the posts and turned off my phone for a while. When I finally checked my messages a couple of hours later, they had sent me an email expressing regret for the past but also criticizing my actions. They threatened to sue me for posting personal videos of them without consent, claiming it was unethical and would harm my business. It seemed they had already been served with a defamation suit. They insisted I retract my actions or they would expose my unethical behavior, which could negatively impact my firm. I shared this with my business partners, who felt strongly that we had done the right thing and saw no reason to back down. They pointed out that my parents were the ones who had lied to undermine my credibility. Although they had a valid point, I still felt conflicted about proceeding with the lawsuit, especially after their half-hearted apology in the email. I was aware that this lawsuit could bring negativity to all of us, but I also recognized that my parents' apology was meaningless if it only arose from fear for their own careers. I had spent so long being afraid of them, but now the tables had turned, and I held the power. I resolved to move forward with the lawsuit, ready to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. I was done being the good guy, especially for people who didn't deserve it. My parents had been cruel to me, and no child should have to endure a toxic home environment. Now that I had the chance to retaliate, I was going to take it. I had been the bigger person for far too long, but I saw no reason to continue when they kept coming back to provoke me, desperate for attention. It was disgusting, and I refused to tolerate it any longer. Update 2. My aunt reached out today to see what I had decided regarding my parents, and I told her we were moving forward with the lawsuit. She was pleased with my decision and expressed her pride in me. She even apologized for not doing more for me as a child, but I didn't hold it against her. Back then, she was trying to build her career and simply couldn't take care of me. However, when it mattered most, she stepped up, and I would always be grateful for that. My grandparents and other family members adored my parents, so I knew none of them would believe my experiences. Even if my aunt had contacted Child Protective Services, there was a good chance I'd have ended up in foster care or worse. I don't think she's perfect, but I feel the need to defend her against the criticism she faces from those eager to attack the one person who ever stood up for me. I don't care if her actions were right or wrong, they were enough for me. That's where things stood. I hadn't communicated with my parents since the email, and they were likely still waiting for me to withdraw the suit. It had been 4 days, and we had decided to start with a court-appointed mediator for negotiations. If it came to it, we could take the case to court, but for now, we were aiming for an out-of-court settlement. My parents had plenty of money, so I didn't feel guilty about pursuing this. They were the ones who messed up, so it was only right they faced the consequences. Their frantic phone calls and emails were filled with gaslighting and drama, trying to convince me I was ruining their lives with my lawsuit. It was laughable. They even tried to compare their actions to mine, as if my response to their falsehoods was as wrong as their smear campaign against me. I had merely exposed the truth, while they had tried to destroy my credibility. I was tempted to unarchive those videos after the mediation was over. They really deserved to be exposed. Update 3. Today, the court finalized the mediator for our negotiations. I had temporarily unblocked my parents for this conversation, and they called, demanding to know when I'd be withdrawing the suit. I told them that wasn't happening, which sent them into a furious tirade. The chaos of their screams was overwhelming, so I eventually hung up. They called back immediately. My dad yelled that I was really pushing him to his limits and that stunts like this wouldn't intimidate him. I fired back, letting them have it with everything I'd held back for years. It felt good to finally say what I needed to say. I hung up before they could retaliate. Despite my resolve, they still came after me. They reached out to my aunt, claiming I was suing them for arbitrary reasons, which was a blatant lie. They tried to manipulate her into feeling sorry for them so she could convince me to back down. Thankfully, my aunt wasn't easily swayed. She told them she could offer her sympathy but wouldn't intervene. If they bothered her again, she would report them for harassment. I appreciated her support. After that, there was a quiet period until the evening. My parents had contacted nearly every relative, spinning their narrative that I was suing them for no reason. They sent out a cookie-cutter text, which was comically obvious, as the same message flooded my phone. It was sad to see how desperate they were now that they knew they were in hot water. Update 4. The proceedings have officially begun. I just finished lunch and decided to take a moment to write this. My parents were vicious, but it was clear they were losing this battle, and they would have to accept our terms to avoid court. During lunch, my dad shot daggers at me while my mother played the role of a helpless damsel, trying to console him. Everyone saw through their act. It was transparent and pathetic. My friends and business partners have been incredibly supportive, standing by me throughout this ordeal. One friend even offered to talk afterward. Knowing how emotionally taxing this was for me, I feel incredibly lucky to have great friends and a loving aunt. Even in the face of such horrible parents, I'm grateful for all the support I've received.